Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world and you're joining us today for CSW65. I'm Gail Mattson with the International Network of Women Engineers and Scientists and one of the co-hosts for this session this morning on empowering women in STEM is essential for achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'll be the moderator today. I'm an environmental engineer with a degree in chemistry and biology and a master's degree in environmental engineering. I'm currently working as an environmental safety and health specialist for the United States Department of Energy. In fiscal year 2001, I was the president of the Society of Women Engineers, and I'm the immediate past president of INWES. INWES, the International Network of Women Engineers and Scientists, and the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, WFEO, and the International Science Council. Together, we represent women in science and technology and engineering and math in over 100 countries. INWES is a global network of organizations of women in STEM with organizational members, university members, individual members, corporate partners, altogether representing over 250,000 women in 60 countries. We're an NGO partner with UNESCO, as well as we have ESOC status with the United Nations. And the mission for INWES is to build a better future worldwide through the full effective participation of women and girls in all aspects of STEM. The World Federation of Engineering Organizations is the peak international body of professional engineering institutions, founded in 1968 under the auspice of UNESCO. 100 plus national professional engineering institutions, 12 international and continental and regional professional engineering institutions representing over 30 million engineers. They also are a co-chair of the major science and technology group at the UN and representation of major UN organizations and an associate of UNESCO. The International Science Council is a non-governmental organization with unique global membership that brings together 40 international scientific unions and associations from over 140 national and regional scientific organizations, including academics and research councils. They are also a co-chair of the major science and technology group at the UN and associated with UNESCO. Our topics today: why is it important to empower women to take part in all areas of STEM? Gender equality is essential for business growth, for innovation, for the knowledge economy, and for achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Our talks will cover the diversity imperative, the gender gap in mathematics, computing, and natural sciences, developing capacities in Africa, and leadership. So here's our agenda today. I've got some more introductions to do. Our first talk will be on the diversity imperative for more women in STEM by Dr. Kanga. Then we'll have our second talk will be the global approach on the gender gap in mathematical computing and natural sciences from Dr. Joe Boufford. And our third talk is developing capacities women in STEM in Africa by Yetunde Holloway. And then our fourth talk will be on the leadership in women in STEM by Dr. Sarah Pierce. And then at the end, we'll have a session of moderated discussions. But after each one of the talks, we'll have a short section on Q&A and then a moderated discussion at the end. We want to encourage your involvement with our session today. We want you to bring your questions and your experiences, your ideas to share with us. So please introduce yourself and provide contact information in the chat function. At the bottom of the screen where there's the chat, please click on that and give us your name and contact information so we can follow up with you. Please respond to questions in our poll on the page for this session announcement in the CSW65 forum. We're letting you know that this session is also being live streamed on YouTube. So if you go back to your forum page and where you came in this morning and look on the right-hand side, you'll see a section for polls, chats and polls. Under the polls, we've got some questions for you, and this is where you can fill out that information right here. Okay.
Apologies, Gail. I'm just going to have to say big apologies here. We have, I'm not able to live stream to YouTube. I'm not terribly sure why, but the option doesn't seem to be appearing in this Zoom at the moment, and I cannot find how to do it at all.
Okay.
So just apologies for that for anybody who's hoping to see this on YouTube.
Okay. Thanks for checking on that, Sarah. Appreciate it. Okay. So as again, I said during the session, please use the chat box to submit your questions, and I'll be checking that chat box to see what questions come in. After each talk, we'll address a few of those questions. And as I said earlier, then at the end of the session, during our moderated session, we'll talk about the remaining questions and so forth. And the responses to those questions are going to be uploaded on the various websites for the 3 organizations. So let's get started. Our first speaker, as I mentioned, is Dr. Marlene Kanga. Dr. Kanga is a chartered chemical engineer, an honorary fellow of the Institution of Engineers Australia, and an honorary fellow of the Institution of Chemical Engineers in the UK. She is also a fellow of the Academy of Technical Science and Engineering in Australia, the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and a foreign fellow of the Asian Academy of Engineering and Technology. Dr. Kanga has been listed among the top 100 women of influence in Australia and the top 100 engineers in Australia. She was the 2014 Federation of Engineering Institution in Asia and Pacific Professional Engineer of the Year. She is a member of the Order of Australia as recognition for her leadership of the engineering profession. Dr. Marlene Kanga is a board member of Air Services Australia, Sydney Water Corporation, and an advisor to Innovation Australia, and chair of the R&D Incentives Committee, the largest government program supporting innovation. She was president of Engineers Australia from 2013 to 2014, served as the vice president of INWES 2014 to 2017, and is the immediate past president of WFEO. So I'm going to stop sharing, Marlene, so you can share your slides.
Thank you very much, Gail, and it's a real pleasure to be here today to speak on this very important topic on the need for more women in STEM. I hope you can see my slides.
Yes, we can see it.
So just briefly, you've already mentioned the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, so I won't repeat it, but you can see our global map here, the dark blue showing where all our members are across the world, representing, as you said, some 30 million engineers. The topics I'm going to talk about today are the engineering challenges that we're faced with in the 21st century, the diversity imperative for engineering, and how we can achieve real change through positive steps. Some of the wicked problems that we are facing today are the reason for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You see here on this map, the percentage of the population that have hand washing facilities as at 2017, something that's been so important for us as we've fought the COVID pandemic. And you can see that large proportions of the continents of Africa, Asia, and some parts of South America lack clean hand washing facilities. And similarly, for access to clean sources of electricity, you can see again that large parts of the continent of Africa and parts of Asia still lack access to reliable sources of electricity. And this is emphasized even more through this image of the world at night, where you can compare the light coming from Africa relative to that from Europe. So there is a great deficit, and the objective of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is to work to achieve these 17 goals so that we leave no one behind. The World Federation of Engineering Organizations under my presidency developed a strategic approach to advance the UN Sustainable Development Goals through engineering, because every one of these goals requires engineering. We developed the WFEO Engineering 2030 plan and a number of projects to advance these goals. The recently released UNESCO engineering report called Engineering for the Sustainable Development Goals aligns with this vision and shows how important it is that engineers work to advance these goals. In fact, the report shows how engineering can make it happen. And of course, an important part of this is that we need to build capacity for more engineers, especially women, with the right skills to advance these goals. So here is the report, which you can download in several languages. And my presentation throughout has links to all the relevant documents that I will talk about. You can see the hero message at the front of the report and also in the executive summary, which says it is essential that more young people, especially girls, consider engineering as a career. And this hero message was taken up by the UN Secretary General, who has said, as a trained engineer, I'm passionate about the potential of engineering to help solve the most pressing challenges facing our world. But to truly maximize that potential, we must ensure women and girls have equal opportunities and representation in this field. This was released on March 4th as part of World Engineering Day 2021. And yes, the world does need more engineers, especially women engineers. Engineers have developed technologies that have enormous transformative potential in the digitally connected future workforce, including advanced automation, telecommunications, robotics, and artificial intelligence. But we need women engineers to contribute to the diversity of thought that is vital for this innovation and for the development of solutions that reflect community standards, values, and aspirations for sustainable development. New technologies are also empowering women. For example, mobile communications and the internet are providing access in the remotest parts of the world to banking, entrepreneurship, and improved outcomes for health, education, and childcare. So here then is the diversity imperative for the profession. We need more women so that the team is relevant and the composition of the engineering team is similar to that of the community in terms of age, ethnicity, gender, and so on. Diverse teams understand and reflect community and stakeholder values and maintain, importantly, the social license to operate. New technologies are increasing disruption, and successful navigation of these needs diverse teams. Organizations that encourage diversity and inclusion tend to be ethically sound. They have good governance, good procedures and processes. They're more efficient because, in fact, they're making the best use of the intellects that are available to them for engineering. And of course, a basic human right, equal opportunity for all. And it's been proven over and over again that diverse teams are more innovative, reduce risk, make better decisions, and avoid groupthink, ensuring that a wide range of perspectives are considered. Companies and organizations that have diverse teams also have better performance, financial, customer relationships, safety and sustainability, and of course, higher reputation. So diversity is an opportunity that cannot be ignored. And engineering, of course, needs more brain power, not muscle power. And to solve those wicked problems, we need diverse teams, because a diverse team of competent performers always outperforms a homogeneous group of star performers by a substantial margin when it comes to complex problem solving or innovating. So there's a great reason for more diversity. And we need to change the rules to get better outcomes so that we leave no one behind. We need to change the rules for engineering and technology to solve the world's most pressing problems. So how do we work together to achieve real change? Here are some ideas. We have here tonight some great networks through WFEO, through INWES, and through the International Science Council. The WFEO has a committee for women in engineering, and we will be hearing the chair speak tonight as well. And here are some great images of us when we first started at our inaugural meeting in 2008 to 10 years later in 2018, and the first African Women in Engineering Summit also in 2018. We are working hard to attract more girls into STEM with partners like Women's to get 1 million girls into STEM careers. We launched this program, in fact, at the CSW61 meeting in March 2017. And here you see one of our networks at the Kuwait Society of Engineers, where Kuwait, in fact, has more than 50% women in engineering. This is the paradigm that we want to achieve across the world. We've published a number of books and participated in projects that show the pathways to success, such as this great publication by Gender Insight on scientific leadership and how women have risen through the ranks. And similarly for engineering, we have published 2 volumes, Rising to the Top, that tell the stories of leading women engineers from around the world and how they have negotiated successful careers. At WFEO, during my presidency, women have made great progress. From having no speakers, no female speakers as keynotes prior to 2017, we now have 25% of speakers at conferences being women, keynote speakers, 25% being keynote speakers, panelists and chairs of sessions. All WFEO board committees have women as members, something that didn't occur before. We have a board committee chair shown here, Ania Lopez, as chairing a board committee, and several women chairing some of our other committees and being on our executive council. So this is a great demonstration of how leadership encouraged by women encourages other women in the organization and greater diversity. And of course, the network effect is tremendous. And here you see a meeting of an INWES meeting in Asia, of the Asia Pacific Nation Network. Women from more than 17 countries in Asia coming together to learn, mentor, and support each other. And finally, to recognize the achievements of women engineers, we've inaugurated an award to recognize leading women engineers, sponsored by Madam Dongming Zhu, one of China's leading women engineers and entrepreneurs. We've participated with UNESCO on policy-making projects such as the STEM and gender advancement, which has had great impact on national policy for greater gender diversity in STEM. And we've advocated around the world, including at the Commission on the Status of Women, with written submissions this year on the need for women in STEM and the importance of this important area in advancing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we're also changing engineering from the inside out by revising and updating the benchmarks for engineering education and professional competencies for greater diversity and inclusion. This is due for approval in June 2021, and in 5 or 10 years will, we hope, result in a remarkable change in the culture and practice of engineering, fostering greater diversity and inclusion. And finally, World Engineering Day, celebrated on 4th March every year, is an opportunity to engage with the community, government, and policymakers, and to encourage young people, especially girls, to consider engineering for a career, as a career, because women engineers can create the world we want. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. That was excellent. Very succinct covering of all the different topics we've been talking about of getting women into engineering. And I really am impressed with the WFEO in getting women into leadership position at various levels within the organization. That's excellent, and it's definitely going to make a change. I'm looking here in the chat, And I have one comment here that you might want to address, Marlene. This is from Magna from Germany. She's with Azonta International. I'm working in the field of equal opportunities in academia, and at my university, increasing the number of women in STEM is a big challenging issue. We try to encourage them, by many women don't want to be linked to a gender topic, as in a male-dominated field. They feel it weakens their status. How do we address that?
Well, I think it's really with role models. There's not enough women engineers around, so those who consider that it's male-dominated consider that because they don't see enough women. But in fact, that's not true. In many countries in Asia and in the Middle East, you will find that there's 50% women in universities, and even in the profession and working careers, there's 30 or 40% women. It's actually in the European countries and in more of the developed world where we have a smaller proportion of women and where it's considered male dominated. So we've really got to change that thinking. And some of the books and stories and mentoring events that we've had are doing just that.
Okay. Could you explain a little bit more detail how you were successful at WFEO and getting women into various leadership positions at different levels?
Well, I just did it because I was president of WFEO. I was only the second woman to be elected president, and in its 50-year history, and I was privileged actually to celebrate its 50 years during my presidency. And I just insisted that it be done, and it got done. The important thing is that women in leadership have this particular lens, and because of their own experience, they can make that change, whereas men don't notice it at all. And also in my board positions in some of the largest organizations in Australia, I'm able to advocate along with my fellow female board members, for example, for gender pay equity, which again is we consider as women very important, but men may not have that same sensitivity and lens. So this is the importance of having women in leadership, because we can drive real change from the top.
Now, as part of WFEO's initiative, are they encouraging their member organizations to do the same thing and actually make a concerted effort to find women for leadership in their various national organizations?
Now, progress has been very slow. And one of the first things that WFEO needs to do is to ensure that all its member organizations has a chapter for women in engineering. It may seem very surprising, but actually only a few of the professional engineering institutions have these chapters. And so women have formed networks outside the main professional engineering institutions and have developed in parallel to the professional engineering institutions. This is all very well. In these all-female networks, women do grow their leadership skills, but they will not make it to the national level if they don't go into the main professional engineering organizations. And around the world, only about 20 women have become presidents of their national professional engineering institutions, which is a very small number and an issue that we really need to address.
Okay. So it sounds like we need, what about companies? Has a WFEO said anything to companies, corporate sponsors, about the same thing, getting diversity at various levels?
Again, very slow progress is being made. And I think we need to get the professional engineering institutions house in order before we address the corporate institutions. But we do participate in various policy initiatives, especially at UNESCO, which is addressing diversity generally, but not specifically with corporations.
I guess the last thing I'd like, we've got another minute or two in your time slot, is expand a little bit more about World Engineering Day. And I know I want to applaud your efforts on getting that through UNESCO and getting a vote to recognize World Engineering Day. Do some of the activities with World Engineering Day address some of the STEM issues?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was one of the great reasons that we pushed ahead with World Engineering Day. This was one of the legacies of my term as president. And during my term, I worked very hard to get this across the line. I had no idea how to do it, but we managed to get it done with a unanimous vote by the UNESCO member states to declare 4th March, which is the founding day of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, as World Engineering Day. And this is a great opportunity to talk to the general community in particular, and to government and policymakers on what engineering is all about, and to empower young people in particular, and women and girls, on the importance of engineering. And the link to the Sustainable Development Goals is very important, because it gives engineering a purpose. It's a career with purpose. And a lot of women like to do engineering if they think it will make a difference. And this is a way to have the conversation about the purpose of engineering in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. So there's a great link there, and you'll see that the logo of World Engineering Day has the world with the 17 colors of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm pleased to say that this year it's really taken off. We had more than 200 events around the world on 4th March, and still going in the last 2 weeks. And we engage with more than 50 million people. So in year 2, so that's tremendous.
Well, excellent, excellent. So thank you again for leading that initiative. I know I participated in a couple of events last week and they were fun. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Our next speaker is Dr. Jo Ivey Boufford. Dr. Boufford is a clinical professor of global health at the New York University School of Global Public Health and clinical professor of pediatrics at New York University School of Medicine. She is president emeritus of the New York Academy of Medicine and was chair of the board of the International Society for Urban Health. She served as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Health in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services from November 1993 through January 1997. While at the Health and Human Services, she was the U.S. representative on the executive board of the World Health Organization from 1994 to 1997. She was elected to membership of the U.S. National Academy of Medicine in 1992, served on its board on global health, and served 2 4-year terms as the Foreign Secretary from 2003 to 2011. She was elected to membership in the National Academy of Public Administration in 2015. So Dr. Boufford, would you like to take over now? Her talk is the global approach to the gender gap in mathematics, computing, and natural sciences. You're muted. You have to come off mute, Jo.
Thanks very much, Gail. And let me get the slides set up. I think this is gonna, looks like it.
Yes, we can see it.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. I'm really delighted to be here to join my colleagues representing the International Science Council and to present an overview of their 2020 report, A Global Approach to the Gender Gap in Mathematical, Computing, and Natural Sciences. This was published in February of 2020, actually would have been a month before the original date of this session. So we're sort of commemorating a year after. And let me begin just by presenting a little bit background. Let's see, all right, on the ISC. The ISC, under its new name, it was formerly called ICSU, was created in 2018, following a merger of the International Council for Science, and the International Social Science Council. The vision is for science as a global public good, and the new organization has multiple members, 40 international science unions and associations, and more than 140 national and regional scientific organizations, including academic and research councils. And really through its members, it creates a network for action to advance a variety of areas in science. The vision here of the council and its mission is really to be a global voice for science and really address key values of science by promoting international research and scholarship, really bringing evidence to the decision makers, promoting the equal advancement of rigor, creativity, and relevance, and has been recently very visible on protecting scientific freedom and advocating ethical principles for the responsible practice of science. The ISC, as Gail mentioned earlier, is a co-lead coordinator of the UN Major Group for Science and Technology with the World Federation of Engineering Organizations. And as such, has been very close to UN operations and certainly to the creation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm going to really focus my presentation on the ISC's efforts to achieve gender equality, and empower women and girls in the science and technology fields. So just to begin, definition of what is the gender gap. This is from the report, and it really is a definition that's interestingly promulgated by the World Economic Forum and was adapted by those leading this report because there is an annual reporting of the gender gap in a variety of areas globally. 11 organizations really joined together to produce the report, 7 being union members of the ISC, 4 other organizations were UNESCO through its STEM and Gender Advancement Group, the Gender and Science, Innovation, Technology and Engineering Group, Gender Insight, the Organization of Women in Science for the Developing World, and the Association for Computing Machinery, ACM, through ACM Women. The study had sort of 4 components to really do a broad-based kind of investigation of the gender gap in STEM disciplines, a global survey, a look at the implications of women's visibility in scientific publications, really looking to compile best practices that could be available on a website as part of a toolkit for organizations interested in advancing the role of women and girls in the sciences, and finally some regional conferences in Africa, Asia, and Latin America to discuss findings. So I want to touch on each of these elements of the work very briefly. Obviously, this was a complex and time-consuming program, and I can only spend a little bit of time, but the report is quite extensive with a lot of the resources available within it. The first element of the work was a global survey of scientists, a survey that was adapted from a model that's been used in physics for some time, was distributed through ISC and its member organizations. It was launched in May of 2018 and closed in December of 2018, and had, as you see, over 30,000 respondents from 159 countries, 12 regions of the world, and 8 disciplines listed on the slide. And I think the general consensus was that the gender gap is very real across all disciplines, development levels, and geographies. And this was sort of a diagram to show what the key observations were from women and men. It was 50% of the respondents were men responding to the survey. Sexual harassment was experienced pretty much across the board, many instances. A sense that women were not really encouraged by their relatives to go into the STEM professions. Marlene mentioned earlier the lack of missing role models in engineering. This is also a case in a number of the sciences. there was an observation that the program quality for the doctoral programs and the support actually from doctoral thesis advisors was felt to be less for many women seeking advanced degrees. Career progression was slow. Obviously, some of this was complicated by interruptions in career due to childcare responsibilities, but nevertheless, a lot of it had to do with the structural impediments to women advancing in their fields. And then obviously the salary gap, which has been, I think, is true in general across many professions. The second area of work for the study was really looking at scientific publications, and again, a technique that was adapted from prior work in this area in the field of mathematics. Really looked at millions of publications. It's pretty impressive, the analytic methods that were used in this meeting, in this work. And the study really looked at gender gap, looked for insights in the proportion of women as scientific authors, compared so-called population dropout rates as a proxy for the length of scientific careers, looked at the productivity gap, which examines the amount of research output per gender, and often is used as an argument against promotion and tenure for women. And finally, the presence of women as authors in renowned journals. And the findings are posted here. I think the good news is that in some fields, the proportion of women authors is clearly increasing. Most of that advance occurring in Europe and US, and a real data problem, which is not atypical of many areas that have really not gotten the political or policy attention they deserve in the past. This is just a pictorial of a shift, a welcome shift really, in the publication rates in the fields of astronomy, astrophysics, and chemistry, but pretty much noticing no real improvement over almost a 50-year period in mathematics and theoretical physics. And finally, the study aimed to really identify and make available to the broader global community examples of good practice in supporting and advancing both the education and careers of women in the STEM sciences. And a database was created it is available on the website. It was used the UNESCO dimensions in its science, technology, and innovation gender objectives, STI goal, GOL. And because this set of elements was really designed for an analysis of policies by UNICEF, the study group here adapted the search tool to add subcategories that would capture a broader range of practices with the idea of making those available. So these numbers really reflect the examples, the number of examples in the search by category. You can see the highest number of examples are in primary and secondary education, which are often talked about, the next being in career progression, and probably the least attention being paid potentially to the policymaking process, which shapes many of the institutions, as Marlene mentioned, for engineering, and similarly entrepreneurship and innovation in the STEM sciences still very early on. The group looked at these and added, as I said, some more detail, and wanted to highlight 4 elements that they felt needed more emphasis in the toolkit. And this was the issue of engaging families and communities, especially if it is contrary to cultural expectations and norms. This is a complex undertaking, but important to look at and explore. Engaging in exploring socio-scientific issues, the idea of entering from social sciences, bringing women into the broader STEM disciplines being a strategy that has been shown to be effective. Increased in social supports, especially peer networks and mentors. We've discussed that in the other fields. And then the issue of leadership, advocacy, and communication skills, really capacity building for women who are already in positions to play a leadership role in the STEM sciences. So I want to shift for the last few minutes of my discussion, so suggested by Marlene actually, to talk about an area that's very important in the Sustainable Goals that I think could be a platform on which the STEM disciplines could really integrate. I noticed in the work of ISC, not a lot of mention of engineering, and similarly, I think in many of the engineering reports, while they're done in partnership, there isn't much of an exploration of the ST&M sciences. So I'm going to suggest that while we talked about SDG 5 on gender equality, certainly SDG 11, which is really a new recognition of the importance of cities in the Sustainable Development Goals, may be an opportunity for an area of work that's critical to the future of global health, and achieving the SDGs could be an area to further examine. I'll just talk a minute or two about this. This are the details of SDG 11, and while you know, for example, I'm a health professional, I don't see the word health here, but when I look at these characteristics, all of these are really determinants of health from the broader social determinants point of view. And I think similarly, many of these infrastructure and areas of work to achieve human settlements that are inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable are fundamental in engineering, from construction to transportation systems to air and water quality to urban design and others. All of them have engineering elements in them, and all of them require intersectoral engagement as well as interdisciplinary collaboration. I raise this area because ISC actually does sponsor a global program focusing on urban health and well-being. It's located in Xiamen, China, hosted by the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Institute for Urban Environment, and the organization of which I'm chair of the board, the International Society for Urban Health, and the network of global academies of science and medicine, the Inter-Academy Partnership, are also sponsors of this particular program. The ISUH, which is solely committed really to advocacy for advancing urban health and health equity through these broader determinants of health, creates a platform that's quite interdisciplinary in nature and comes together on an annual basis and through collaborative work. We have a number of engineers who come to quite an interdisciplinary meeting that's, I think, unique in its nature. And so one of the questions you might ask is, why do we want to focus on cities? And I think the answer that comes up is that while cities only occupy about 2% of the landmass of the world, they are in fact the economic engines of the globe, driving culture, arts, and innovation in most societies, sometimes because of the link to global efforts. But at the same time, they are generating well over the majority of greenhouse gas emissions, global waste, and global energy consumption. So in a sense, what happens to cities really will determine whether or not we meet the goals of the SDGs. And I think the importance of cities and the inequities within cities has been certainly put under a sharp focus during the COVID epidemic. This is an approach that we use at the ISUH to think about health in cities. You can see that the health sector, the healthcare delivery system, and arguably the professions of public health infrastructure are only one of a number of really important sectors, and decisions are made every day in these sectors which can promote health or not. Obviously, a pro-car decision in the transportation space versus mass transit can have effects not only on air pollution and road traffic accidents, but also obesity through active exercise, bike lanes, areas to walk in cities. The energy area, built environment, environmental things used as environmental tools and building tools are really important in this area, and choices really determine international standards for green buildings and green energy are equally important to both internal pollution as well as external urban planning, creating green spaces in cities has been increasingly linked both to mental health and stress reduction. It's gotten a lot of attention in the last months of COVID epidemic and lockdowns, where really the only chance to be outside may be in local parks. So I invite you to sort of consider joining an international community. We at the ISUH are having a virtual conference July 6th to 8th. And we think it will provide a platform to invite those of you on this call and others in the broader scientific and engineering community to think of coming together to think about urban health, but most importantly, to think together about advancing the role of women in leadership roles in the STEM sciences. So thank you very much. Stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Boufford. That was excellent. Excellent. Thank you. I don't have any specific questions for you. A couple of general questions have come up that we'll address at the end of the session during a moderated Q&A. There's several questions have come up about getting copies of these slides. So as I mentioned earlier, I noticed we've got a lot of people that joined us about 5 minutes into our presentation. Please introduce yourself in the chat function and give us your email. We will be sending out the slides or responding to comments, requests for information if you put it into the chat. So please use the chat to introduce yourself and let us know what slides or information you would like. So thank you very much. So a similar question to you, Joe, with the ISC. Has the ISC worked on getting more women into leadership positions?
Yeah, I think it was interesting to me that in the study, the 11 unions and organizations that were working on this, where many of them were led by women. I think this this effort was really making a sort of higher level of visibility for the importance of women's equality and equity. And the goals of the study have been to really continue to work on these issues in the members of ISC going forward, and also to look carefully at the representation within a pretty diverse set of disciplines, as well as partner organizations. Obviously, this year of interruption since the publication of the study, I think, has hampered really setting up an agenda for action, but it's definitely a commitment of ISC to do so.
Okay, well, that was sort of my next question. You mentioned slightly some follow-up from the global report, but they are going to be tracking that and reporting that work. Can we see that or find that information?
Yeah, it's not yet on the website, but I think the plan is to continue to do that. And as I said, I encourage people to look at the study itself, because all of the tools used for the survey, for the literature review, and also the details of best practice examples that are hoped to be increasingly used by members of ISC are all there. And the plan really would be to track the uptake and to see hopefully what results are by continuing to tap into some of these global metric systems.
Good, good, good. Well, thanks for sharing that information. I'm looking forward to reading the report and following up on their actions. So thanks a lot, Dr. Boufford. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gail, just to say, there is a question, I think, which is directed to Dr. Boufford on
Okay.
chat. It says, do we have an estimate of what portion of health problems might be eradicable through creating a perfect urban environment?
It's a really good question. I think many people, to the degree that the most common global health problems, which have been a bit obscured by COVID, but obvious because of the higher vulnerability, are chronic diseases, cardiovascular diseases, cancers, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and other issues. They share the same risk factors, which are tobacco, exercise, and diet. And the issues of the built natural environment in cities, the availability of healthy foods, the ability to exercise, clean air, all of these are really these upstream determinants of health. And I say this as a physician, in medicine, we've never been as good at preventing as we are at treating. And I think one of the real goals of introducing these broader determinants and working with other sectors is to show that probably in many countries, access to healthcare, in the United States, it's only lack of access is only responsible for about 10% of premature death, and all of the rest of premature death is really attributable to built natural environment, and obviously personal behaviors which are exacerbated by poverty and some of the failures of social safety nets. So I think a very, very large percentage of illness could be prevented, and vulnerability to infectious disease could be prevented by more attention to decisions made in other sectors that either promote health or undermine it.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we'll go to our third speaker, and our third speaker is engineer Yetunde Holloway. She holds both a first degree in, oops, Sarah, you need to remind me. Yetunde Holloway holds both a first degree in civil engineering and a master's degree from the University of Lagos, Nigeria. She is a registered engineer, a fellow of the Nigerian Society of Engineers, a member of the Nigerian Institution of Civil Engineers, and a member of the Institute of Facility Managers. Engineer Holloway is now the executive director with the Special Committee for Rehabilitation of Public Schools in Lagos State, as appointed in 2020 by the governor. She had previously worked with the Lagos State Development and Property Corporation, where she held progressive leadership roles in the execution of major projects for the organization. And she previously worked locally and internationally in the private sector. She has served as chairman of the Nigerian Society of Engineers, Lagos branch, and was a founding executive of the Association of Professional Women Engineers in Nigeria, the Lagos chapter. She is presently the chair of the Women in Engineering Committee of the WFEO, and her vision includes highlighting the roles of female engineers in achieving the SDGs and leaving the world a better place. So, Yetunde, you're next. Want to share your slides?
Yes, share. Hello. Yeah, there we go. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here with such a distinguished set of ladies. Marlene, Gail, Joe, Greg, and Sarah, fantastic people. So today I'm looking at developing STEM capacities of women in Africa, and with the Sustainable Development Goals in focus. So I'm Yetunde Holloway, I'm the chair of the Women in Engineering Committee. Gail has said that already. Again, Gail has spoken about what the World Federation of Engineering Organizations does. So I'll just tell you what the committee, Women in Engineering Committee, actually does. We have four main thematic areas, and two include capacity building. One to encourage female engineering leaders in the workforce, and the other is to increase diversity and inclusivity in the workforce. We also are looking at the Sustainable Development Goals with the gender lens from an engineering point of view. And last but not the least, we're looking at engineering strategic indicators, which is the main thrust of the discussion today. We want to see whether we're looking at how the lack of engineering strategic indicators, gendered strategic indicators, affects the capacity building initiatives around in Africa particularly. And the fourth, so really the fourth industrial revolution is upon us. Everybody knows that. With the robotics, the 3D, the genetic engineering, and women scientists have a critical role to play in achieving that and achieving gender equality. But there's an underrepresentation. Like my colleagues have said, there's an underrepresentation in all over the world of females in STEM, but it's very acute in Africa. The table on the right-hand side of the screen shows how bad it is. In none of the states as at that time have they achieved parity, but some countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, are particularly dismal. Ghana, 18.3%, Mali, 16%, Burundi, Togo, 10.1%, 2%, and this is from the UNESCO science report. For Africa to meet up with the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030, they need to take seriously the underrepresentation of STEM women. They need to develop, Africa needs to develop women and ensure that they are well represented in STEM areas and come up with initiatives and imperatives to ensure that women stay in the STEM fields and their potential is utilized. This underrepresentation shows up as disparities in the tech industry. This McKinsey report on the right tells us that at the bottom of the ladder, we have up to 62% of women in telco, tech, and media. But by the time we get to board levels where the decision making takes place, it falls to 16%, which means that women are not taking part in decision making and leading as they should. And that's from a McKinsey report in Lagos particularly. And there are various initiatives all over the world to improve female STEM capacity. There are government policies. The African Union has a gender policy to achieve an African society founded on democracy. And then there are various initiatives by female professional engineering organizations, non-profits, and all that. And on the right, I have a collage. The Federation of African Engineering Organizations also have a Women in Engineering Committee, and APWEN has made so many strides in trying and getting the girl child to come into engineering. So you can see that we have a lot of, in the previous slide, we have a lot of females at the bottom of the ladder, but as it goes up, it becomes more and more difficult. So, but in spite of the different initiatives and advocacies, and even the UN has a gender advancement program, but the gender imbalances remain at upper levels. So we're looking at why is this, in spite of all the efforts? And there are various barriers. Some are what we call the persistent barriers, the gender stereotyping, and the societal prejudices, such as early marriage for the girl child. Some are institutional, gender pay gaps, microaggressions in the workplace that make women feel isolated in the workplace. And then some are policy related. The policies, they're not cohesive, either as individual countries or as a whole in Africa. The policies that support the STEM programs support women, they're not really cohesive. And the result of this, and like I mentioned here, UNESCO says that we have 34 million children out of school as a result of the more recent barriers, such as the terrorism and the kidnapping in schools. And the terrorists actually target female boarding schools and they cart away children. So we have about 34 million children out of school in sub-Saharan Africa. And with those kind of numbers, just sub-Saharan Africa, not the whole of Africa, what does the future hold? What does it hold for the girl child? And what does it hold for Africa? So for the girl child, clearly, the inequalities are exacerbated. There are more and more girls out of school. But apart from that, the development of the progress of the fourth industrial revolution, which needs women, the potential of women is underused, underutilized, and the concepts, designs of and outputs of STEM projects products that Africa should rely on, women are not involved in it. The girls will not be involved in it. That's in the next few years. And there are various imperatives to break the barriers, various various ways of breaking the barriers, the systemic and structural barriers. And most of the barriers include policy making and capacity building efforts. And so I took a broad review of the capacity development process by the UNDP. I just investigated the process, the cyclical process shown here. For the first step, you engage the partners and you build a consensus, talk to your stakeholders and all that, get as much information as possible. Then the second step or stage involves assessing your capacity needs and the assets. And then the fourth defines the strategies to be used to address the problem, the capacity development or capacity building problem. The fourth one involves the implementation of the strategies. And the fifth will monitor and evaluate, assess the impact of the strategies. But I now looked again at step 2 and step 5. In step 2, if we don't have gender data for capacity building of STEM, how do we actually, what kind of assessments are we actually doing? What kind of assets are we actually coming up with? Because we don't have baseline data. So as step 2 might not be totally correct, step 5 might also not be totally correct because the baseline data is not there to guide the decisions and the capacity building strategies and initiatives. And from what we also saw that the OECD recognized that the lack of basic data and the weak statistical systems, they are detrimental to the capacity development efforts, and they reduce the impact of such initiatives. And this Otokwemu, I can't pronounce it properly, also says that scarce financial resources are being used to find country data, whereas we should have data for the whole of Africa. So some of the initiatives are not as effective as we would expect them to be. But where is this data? In this era of big data, where is it exactly? And Boufford and Toll in the in the UNESCO reports have also recognized that data for women progressing to engineering careers and becoming professionally registered are not available at a global level. So if it's not available at a global level, some countries actually have data, but the data is not standardized. And Africa, we hardly have anything at all. And there's a UN arm, the System of Environmental Economic Accounting, and it includes engineering dependent issues, but it doesn't include data for engineering and engineering disaggregated data. Because I went to their website to go and check, and they didn't seem to have anything on that. So data is important, and we need to bridge the data divide so that our capacity building efforts can be more effective. And clearly, if we do that, I just from Twitter, so, this source says that we'll be able to have statistical laws and regulations and standards, and we'll have financing for data. We will boost our data literacy. We will increase efficiency and impact of investment in data. We will invest in and use country-led results data to monitor progress, and we'll have data on development finance, which will be more comprehensive and transparent. So recommendations and a proposal. We think that if we have sex disaggregated data in engineering, we will have collaborative, accurate and standardized statistics on engineering gender disparities across the continent. We'll be able to develop gender matrix to support policies and programs. We'll have more effective monitoring and evaluation of the existing and new strategies and impact using those metrics. Our policy formulation will be more coherent and will converge so that the efforts will be more sustainable, impactful, robust, and they'll be and will address the gap in tech more effectively. So in conclusion, the lack of data in the STEM arena across Africa is often an excuse for inaction because of the dearth of scientific information to support the call for action. We just hear comments like, there's a woman there, there was a woman there 2 years ago, 3 years ago. In fact, a lot of the ministers and commissioners of STEM, 3 minutes? Okay, so funding the collection and analysis of data is expected to improve the capacity development outcomes across engineering and other STEM professions. And Africa needs to deliberately build capacity for the STEM female with the use of reliable data in order to accelerate the journey to a sustainable future where no one, absolutely no one is left behind. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Yetunde. A lot of new information I hadn't seen, so I appreciate you going through the effort to pull out some new information to share it with us. That's excellent. I don't see any specific questions for you, but some general things came up I wanted to maybe have you elaborate on. I know you're a member of the Women in Engineering Committee for WFEO. Could you expand a little bit more about what that committee does?
Well, there are 4 thematic areas. Like I said in the beginning, We're looking at building capacity for leadership so that more and more women go into leadership positions. And that's, so we are addressing the underrepresentation of women in leadership roles and decision-making roles. We're also looking at capacity building in the inclusivity and diversity. We have an expert on the committee, and so we're looking at that as well, so that because inclusivity and diversity will increase the bottom line for companies and for countries and for organizations. Then we have the gendered indicator, the statistics. We want to have statistics that across the global gendered statistics, which can help and inform policy and decisions on gender equality. And the last but not the least, we're looking at the Sustainable Development Goals from an engineering point of view, but with the gendered lens. How does, because some publications say that Goal 5 is an accelerator for the remaining goals. So how are all the other goals affected by gender equality? I don't think any of the goals can be achieved without gender equality. Thank you.
I agree. I agree. You spent a little bit of time talking about the African Union gender policy.
Yes.
Is this something that's been acknowledged all across Africa or just specific countries? Could you expand a little bit more?
I really don't think much has been done on it. It's been there since about 2008. And it's a policy that, it's not cohesive. It doesn't go around Africa. It's just there. I think it's probably, I can't see much progress with it. However, we have made a bit of progress. We have the Federation of African Engineering Organizations, and we have a female engineer, Carlin Boufford. She's the president of that organization, and we are making moves together with the African Union to make a difference. She has a lot of bright ideas. So we're hoping to work with the African Union to ensure that we get some progress. Thank you.
Yeah, we do have a question that did come in. Does WFEO have immediate plans to gather gender-related data and engineering in Africa?
Well, if you look at the conclusion, okay, I've taken the page off. We're looking for funding from international bodies. So if we can get international bodies, we will be happy to put something together, put teams together to gather data.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that's going to be available through the WFEO then?
No, not through the WFEO. We'll be looking at external bodies like the UN and funders. We're looking for funders to fund the exercise.
Okay. Okay. Sarah, do you see any other questions for Yetunde? I see a lot of people asking for copies of the slides, so that's very good. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be providing copies. If you give us your email in the chat, we'll be doing that. We'll be also posting the slides on our website for the three organizations. Joe, you had a question?
I wanted to ask Yetunde a question. I know there probably isn't a database for this, but I'd be quite interested in your sense of why some countries in sub-Saharan Africa have quite a large representation of women in engineering and others don't. Do you have any notions about this or insights about it? I thought it was really interesting, the table you presented.
Well, if you looked at the table actually is an old table. I couldn't find updated information. So if I have information from 2011, I don't know what, that's about 10 years ago. Anything could have happened. But I did mention that at the bottom of the ladder, we have quite a few, the percentage of females is not bad, it's not bad. But as they go up the ladder to professorial level, it becomes more difficult. The leaky pipeline, they fall out through the leaky pipeline. So we need to close that leaky pipeline, find out why and see how we can address those things, formulate policies that can address the leaky pipeline.
I wonder, do you think that any of it has to do with the different language groups and cultural groups, Anglophone, Francophone, Lusophone parts of Africa? It's such a complicated continent. I was just curious.
It is very complicated. And it's not just the continent. Even in my country, Nigeria, we have, I think, about 200 languages. So you can imagine how complicated it is. So it could have to do with that as well. But you see, if we have the numbers, if we have the data, then we can decide what to do and what not to do. Our capacity building initiatives will be more directed towards what those issues.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Gail.
Thank you.
Okay,
Gail, I
yes,
just want to comment.
Marlene, yes, okay.
2 quick points. Firstly, the figures on participation of women in engineering that in Africa show figures that are much higher than many in the developed world. For example, in Australia, it's supposedly 12%, but that includes students. In the profession, it's really below 10%. It's like 7 or 8%. And in many countries around the world, in the developed world, it is the proportion of students is below 20%. So this is a big issue. And so the figures on that basis in Africa don't look that bad. I just thought I'd bring that perspective. And secondly, WFEO will be working with UNESCO on better engineering data. This was a gap in the second UNESCO engineering report released on 4th March. And of course, that will include gender data, gender-based data on engineering. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene, for that. Thank you.
Thank you. So, okay, I want to check. Am I sharing my slides right now?
You are.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. I've got like 5 screens open right now. Okay, thank you. So our 4th speaker is Dr. Sarah Peers. She has a PhD in mathematics and specialized in the application of artificial intelligence for maintenance of mechanical engineering structures. She is currently an advisor and a fellow of the Institute of Innovation and Knowledge Exchange in the United Kingdom and director of the STEM Foundation, also in the UK, where she supports technical vocational education. Her consultancy, Peers and Peers, provides expertise in skills strategy and policy development for innovation, STEM education, and diversity for the engineering and tech sectors. Sarah was the deputy president for INWES from 2018 to 2020 and currently serving INWES as a project coordinator. Sarah has championed gender equality in STEM since 1992 and strongly believes in the power of global collaboration to improve the lives for all. So Sarah, you want to share your screen?
There we go. So hopefully you can see that.
Yes.
Great, brilliant. Okay, so first of all, I should say a big thanks to the IET here in the UK for giving me a travel award for traveling during COVID year, which of course didn't happen. But the reason why I was given that award was to be able to join WFEO and the International Science Council at CSW65, 64. And now today, so that we could collaborate. So that's a big thank you to them. So I wanted to mention a little bit more about the International Network of Women Engineers and Scientists. Basically, our objectives are 5 main objectives, all leading up to the mission that Gail explained, the mission of creating a better world through the full and effective participation of all women and girls in all areas of STEM. So our objectives are around strengthening the capacity of individuals and organizations, increasing women in STEM, of course, but also be a responsible voice. And that links to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, obviously, quite nicely. And it's also about expanding opportunities for education, but at all levels. And also establishing new networks and new associations. Some of the history of INWES lies in the International Conferences for Women Engineers and Scientists, which is really, this has been running since 1964. So I'm mentioning this partly because the next one is in September 2021 in the UK. It's been hosted by Warwick University. ICWES is a key activity for INWES. INWES has only existed since about 2002, and ICWES has been running since 1964, but it is very much a networking event intended to empower women in STEM, but also to share experiences and to get more information out there. So I'd like to start off with a few snapshots of women in leadership in STEM generally. So if we started off with looking at women in STEM, I think many of you will know this particular figure, that it's a minority of science researchers worldwide who are women. You've heard from Dr. Marlene Kanga and Yetunde Holloway about the issues in engineering. In fact, in the engineering workforce, the figures are extremely low. The World Economic Forum have expressed the fact that the persistent underrepresentation of women in STEM had long-term effects, not just on gender equality, but also on economic development. And the global gender pay gap is something partly to do with the fact that the roles in STEM are very well paid and there are not so many women in these roles. But we can say a little bit more as well, and that just say, actually, women don't seem to achieve those most prestigious prizes in STEM fields. They're not so visible at the highest levels. What about just leadership generally, gender and leadership? I think this is a really shocking figure, and that is that in studies carried out across the world, 90% of men and women are biased against women. They think that women are not so capable. They feel that women are not so capable, sometimes not necessarily explicitly. Sometimes these are unconscious bias, but these are very real biases and that create barriers for women to reach leadership positions. McKinsey has pointed out that out of every 100 men in leadership positions, only 37 are women. The United Nations has said out of nearly 40% of women are part of the workforce, but only 27% get to managerial positions. And managerial isn't necessarily so senior. Women make up 70% of global health and care, but only a quarter of decision-making roles. And the UN is very clear about this. There cannot be sustainable development without gender equality. There's no gender equality is no sustainable development. And I think this is also rather shocking. This says that most of the climate-related decision-making roles are occupied by men. But what about in STEM in particular? There's a well-known scissor diagram which shows that as you go from sort of, for example, undergraduate degrees all the way up to PhDs and senior posts in academia, you see this effect where the orange is males, men, and you can see that as time goes on, more and more men become leaders. And as women, that's the yellow line, goes on through time, fewer and fewer women are leaders. Actually, so what I wanted to say here was that the scissor diagram that scissor diagram is for all areas of STEM, including medicine, which I would include in STEM. But actually the figures for leadership in STEM and gender look very different in very different areas. So in the global health sector, very few leaders are women, in spite of the fact that most women this is in biology, but in medicine as well, there are many, many women who start in programs related to biology. This particular graph is for biology, but medicine looks rather similar. If you go to engineering, there are very few that start, even more that drop out over time. So what about women STEM leaders and the UN SDGs? I wanted to talk a little bit about the types of leader, because that will lead on to some further thoughts. I think we have talked a little bit about innovation. I'd like to mention a little bit more about some of the work, the evidence for diversity for innovation, and essentially, does having women as leaders make a difference? Leadership, when we talk about leadership, we mean several possible different things. One is reaching to the top of your organization. Another one is being recognized for having huge technical expertise, not necessarily the same as going up to the top of your organization. Another area of leadership is being recognized as influencers. And then of course there's leadership in teams and leadership in the background where you're influencing change, but not necessarily overly recognized for it, but you're exhibiting leadership qualities. Now, these are things that women have, can have, and should have. But there is some work carried out on the different types of leadership, and there are two extremes. One is what's known as dominance, leadership of dominance, and another one is leadership of prestige. And I've included here the sort of variations. So dominance comes with autocracy, being directive, competitiveness, while prestige comes with democracy, being participative, being cooperative. Now, there are some thoughts that women and men have slightly different leadership styles for biological and cultural evolution. However, we know that both of these extremes are of value. So just because women supposedly might be more prestige type leaders does not necessarily mean that they shouldn't be recognized as leaders. You know, all these issues around long-term thinking, innovation, collaboration, transparency, these are things that prestige type leaders exhibit. Now, I've put here a couple of pictures. You'll notice Yetunde Arden there, but also lionesses. Yetunde Arden is the Premier of New Zealand and is very well recognized as an excellent leader and exhibits everything that is known as prestige leadership, that feminine type of leadership. I've put lions there because actually there is nothing in nature that says that women have to be prestige type leaders. So lions are stronger than, lionesses are stronger than lions and tend to lead their social group. So, and there are various other animals that do exactly the same thing. A little bit about women and innovation. There is a lot of work that has gone on to show that the more gender diversity and wider diversity as well in STEM leads to better problem solving and improved innovations. That's been mentioned several times already. Companies and business are beginning to be really aware of these issues, and the Boston Consulting Group, for example, have produced work where they've ended up with the conclusion, no ifs, no buts. Any company that is more gender diverse and more widely diverse is more innovative, and vice versa. Innovative companies tend to be more diverse. But there is a but here. Gender diversity isn't just about pure numbers. It's also about inclusion and making sure that there are women throughout the organization. So inclusion leads to productivity, and that includes innovation. So, I mean, these are pictures to show a little bit more about what happens where you do need to have women in management positions and senior positions, not just a raw number of women. I'll skip to the next question here, which is women achieving the UN SDGs. The various different reports are particularly great that are coming out of the UN looking at gender equality and saying actually gender equality at all levels is absolutely important for the Sustainable Development Goals, and actually providing some case studies. So one particular case study that's repeated in several reports is the fact that if you have women in senior positions in municipal waste management programs, you get better and higher recycling rates. Really basic stuff for the urban areas and so on. And then when we look at economics, the two outstanding leaders in economic theory, economic science theory, are Dame Ellen MacArthur, who's known as a sailor. She sailed around the world on her own, but she set up a foundation on her return, particularly interested in sustainability, and her foundation produced the model of the circular economy, which is now so much in vogue. Kate Rayworth and her Donut Economics and I've shown a picture there of the donut economics, is again something that is now being lauded as one excellent way of linking economics, economic growth, business, health, etc., and social equity as well. So women STEM leaders do make a difference. Another good example is Maria Gabriel from the EU comments on the fact that the leaders in the COVID-19 vaccinations, many of them happen to be women. Going to link back to Yetunde's talk about, to Joe's talk about the global survey, and also the talk from Yetunde and Marlene about WFEO producing case studies and looking for data. In fact, INWES is also working towards data work as well. We'll be working on gender perceptions. INWES has already been, or rather the regional network of the Asia Pacific nations have been working towards gender perceptions, and we're now going to extend this to an international group. But we definitely, as Yetunde has pointed out, need much more data and much more in the way of case studies to show how all of these can make a difference. I'll try to whiz through these last three slides. How do we actually change all of this? Well, clearly we have to change that pipeline, that leaky pipeline. Yes, we can inspire girls and young women, but we must support women in STEM, absolutely. We also have to change perceptions of engineering and science. We can't keep on referring to hard hats. And we also have to change perceptions about women and their leadership skills. We've also heard people talk about the ladder. We have to fix that ladder, because it's no good just pushing people up the ladder if they get knocked off at the very top. So maybe we fix the women. And in fact, a lot of work so far has been around fixing the women. Empowering women is a great mantra. Absolutely. You know, we need to be able to be confident, etc., etc. It's a great start, but maybe it's not just the women that needs fixing. Maybe it's the system that is failing and needs fixing. We know that there are barriers and biases that affect recruitment, lack of access to funding, lack of access to STEM resources. Here's something, I think there was a question earlier about, is there any work being carried out to find out where the barriers are and how it affects it? This particular piece of work was around women applying to use the Hubble Space Telescope. If they put their names on, women's proposals weren't as likely to be accepted to have that space as men's. If they were anonymous, they were much more likely to be accepted. There's some excellent examples as well from GitHub, which is an online software development community, where something similar happens. So there's no point in empowering women if actually they're not going to get the same access. And I think this also links back to Joe's point about productivity. How can you be productive as a researcher if you don't get access to the resources in the same way? So we need to fix STEM leadership. We've got to reevaluate leadership. So this is what came up when I looked up Google and leadership, and I was thinking, any old diagram. There's a man holding out a bunch of people. The people at the front is a man. Cooperation versus competition, prestige versus the other type of leadership. We really need to value both equally. Our systems need fixing. We need to recognize multiple paths to leadership. So that instead of having that leaky pipeline, we have something that looks a little bit more like this. And we have to value that diversity of leadership in global STEM. So we know that this can happen. So I think one of the UNDP, UN Women reports refers to women in agriculture, the WOCAN group, who actually carried out lots of very nice work to change the perception of leadership in men as well as women. And that had a big impact on some of the goals around the UN SDGs. Finally, we are all about the UN SDGs, not just gender equality. Everything that we do as scientists and engineers link to all of these elements, and particularly innovation, which is one of my particular areas. We're very keen as 3 organizations to collaborate, not just because if we can actually support women in science and engineering, if we can empower them, if we can deal with the leadership issues, if we can tackle that pipeline together, we're going to have a much better society and more likely to achieve all those lovely sustainable development goals that we wish to have. Thank you very much. I want to acknowledge the IET once again, because I think that it was a very nice and a pleasant surprise to receive that award. Thank you very much. So Gail, I have finished.
Okay. Yeah, have you stopped sharing screen?
Oh, sure. Sorry. There we go.
Okay. So questions for Dr. Pierce. One of the questions that came up, oops, I lost my chat. Where'd the chat go? Okay. One of the comments came from Estrella from India. She says, Sarah, you're absolutely correct. Women aren't appreciated at all times. In India, there persist other issues such as early marriage in some cultures, especially in economically low families, and not allowed to work later as compared to financially strong communities. So any comments about some of the countries where they have cultural barriers for women?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there is, if we start tackling some of these issues around leadership, around making sure that women are, I mean, sorry, I also meant to say, I mean, Marlene, as a leader, as a woman leader in engineering, you have actually made a huge difference to how WFEO are tackling the leadership issue. So we do need to have, you know, and Jo is a rare example of, you know, a medical science person who's a woman reaching the very top of her profession. So we do have to have both these role models, but the issue why we need women there is also because they are the ones who are more likely, as Marlene pointed out, more likely to turn around and realize that they've got to do much more for society and for the works that's going on culturally and socially elsewhere. You know, so yes, we have to have that work that is cohesive to make sure that we are tackling social problems as well as the sort of science and engineering problems and the etc.
Okay. Another question for you, Dr. Pierce, can you go into more detail about what is meant to recognize multiple paths to leadership?
Oh, that's a very good one. Well, I first of all, in fact, that diagram I use a lot in the UK when I'm talking about paths to engineering in gender, because we have particular issues around our education system. That means that unless you choose certain subjects quite early on in your education, you can never become an engineer. And unfortunately, those particular subject areas are ones that girls tend not to choose for cultural reasons. And because our systems you know, have lots of barriers and biases. So I really intended it for that, saying actually engineers can come from all areas of, with all sorts of backgrounds. And I would say that's the same for scientists, and I'd say that's the same for leaders. So when I talked about the prestige versus the other type of leadership, then these are two extremes, but I'm sure any social scientist who works in the area of leadership will actually say, oh, it's a matrix of ways of being a leader. So we actually need to be able to recognize all of this. At the moment, we don't. We recognize men who've produced, in the case of science and academia, we recognize men who've brought in lots of money and written lots of papers. We recognize men who are loud, who are combative in their approach, who are directive. So if we can start to recognize that prestige type of leadership, collaboration, cooperation, all those things were actually being already recognized as important to actually delivering real solutions. And if we recognize that there are other ways of achieving, as well as other areas, other ways to enter into science and engineering, then we get those multiple paths to leadership. At the moment, we just don't recognize them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to move on now to our moderated discussion. I have 3 questions that have come through the chat box that I want to share with the whole group to address. But if you do have other questions that any of the 4 speakers could address, please add those to the chat box. We would also like to get your input. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, we put these 3 questions for discussion on our page for the invitation for our session. On the virtual forum, on the right-hand side was the section where we have polls and questions, and we are capturing that data. And we had asked these questions to get your input. What actions and programs exist that ensure women scientists and engineers can take part fully in achieving the SDGs? Should the focus be on women becoming agents of change, or on agents of change being gender inclusive? In other words, do we empower women or fix the system? One of the things that Dr. Pierce just addressed in her talk. And then how can gender and STEM organizations better collaborate to meet the 2030 SDGs? So I'm going to go ahead then and start with 3 questions that I identified. The first one was from Arkari Yamada. She's with the Pan and Pacific Southeast Asia Women's Association. What resources are there currently that offer financing targeted at women engineers, entrepreneurs for their startups and products? What networking services exist that serve as resources for hiring managers and companies to encourage and hire gender diversity? So who wants to tackle this general question?
I can very quickly mention that there is an initiative running at the moment that's backed by the World Bank. And I think it's called something like WFEO, and I'm very sorry, I'm going to have to look at another presentation of mine, but it is around women in innovation and enterprise, and making sure that they get better access to your funding, to funding, it's particularly supported by the World Bank. But I'll try and find out a little bit more about that and perhaps add it as an addendum.
Okay, yeah, Marlene?
Yes, thanks, Gail. This is a very interesting question, and there have been a lot of studies that have shown that women entrepreneurs actually raise a far lower proportion of funding for their startups compared to men. And this is around the world. And it's important for innovation and for women's innovation to be recognized and to be commercialized and to become real world products. In Australia, there are a number of organizations that support women entrepreneurs, bring them together, give them mentoring and training, how to pitch to venture capitalists. And in fact, some successful women are also angel investors with them. And these organizations, there's one called Springboards Australia, for example, which encourage women. And I'm sure there are similar organizations around the world. The other example, great example, is the Grameen Foundation, which was started in Bangladesh, which provides microfinance mainly to women. For women, for example, in rural areas to, for example, buy a cow or an animal, because they found that women are far more responsible when they're given these loans to start their business. And they use the money they make, firstly, to repay the loans very quickly. And secondly, they use the money they make on food and education and health. They don't spend it on drinking and gambling, which is this other stereotype for men. So it's actually a very, in terms of the sustainable development goals and achieving greater prosperity, better income, health, education, enhancing women's entrepreneurship is a very important aspect.
Okay. Okay. Second question identified here, and this is from Lauren. I heard a lot of information about increasing the involvement of women in STEM. What is being done to calculate and eradicate the unequal treatment, i.e. harassment and prejudice of women once they are in the STEM field? You want to address that one?
I think if I could just say something very briefly about that, absolutely, we need to do much more to address this. And I think this is what, part of the reason why we need more data is to find out where the issues are. There is some work. I think Australia's had some wonderful work that's gone on around the recruitment issues. And by recruitment, I don't mean necessarily recruitment from university into a sector, but promotion and recruitment generally, and the use of recruitment agencies. Because Australia actually does gather data on from recruitment agencies, they do have some great information about some of the issues around, how women tend not to be promoted or chosen to be taken on interviews, etc. There've been some interesting and some depressing experiments in the US around CVs that have been given a male name or a female name completely made up and then sent around to science departments at universities, and finding out that the man is more likely to be interviewed and given a higher salary, or perhaps offered a higher salary than women. So all of that is rather depressing. So there is some of it, but I think, as Yetunde has pointed out, it's not consistent. The gender metrics are not consistent around the world. And there's definitely huge gaps of data that we need to find out, and then address some of those issues.
Okay. Anyone else want to address this? Okay, I just noticed one of the things that INWES got started with, as Sarah pointed out, was we started with the International Conference of Women Engineers and Scientists. And then when INWES was formed, we've expanded that from the triennial international conference to regional conferences. And this is a topic that we address at many of our regional conferences as well as our international, how to deal with the harassment and the uneven treatment and so forth, and trying to give women ideas of how to address it, how to bring it up to their management, and how to appropriately do the research in your company and find out what the situation is. So these are types of information and workshops that we actually have at our conferences to help women specifically address these kinds of concerns. So
I think what's interesting as well is the fact that corporates are now beginning to realize that women are a resource to be welcomed, and so all that work around innovation and productivity is starting to make the big companies realize that there are issues that they need to deal with, and that's slowly trickling down, but very slowly indeed. And we still have to work with the small businesses, because they are, I know in the UK, the small businesses are a big issue, both because they are the major employers of people, but also because a lot of their, they don't have the data to understand that they need to tackle diversity issues and inclusion issues generally. And of course, universities, we're working on them.
Yeah, okay. Another question, oh, I'm sorry, yes?
I just wanted to comment.
Gail,
Go ahead, Marlene.
Yeah.
and I was just going to say that the whole issue of bullying and harassment is not just in STEM organizations, it's right through society, and it's also family violence is also a huge issue. So it's a system, it's a different kind of system. So it's not a matter of fixing the women. I think it's a matter of providing an inclusive environment where women can flourish whatever they do, not just in STEM, but in all fields.
Yeah. Joe?
Yeah, I wanted to add, I think it's interesting in the sort of a leadership literature from different countries, but one of the elements I think that really has been important and has gotten a higher profile is this notion of emotional intelligence for people who reach the highest levels of leadership in organizations, that theoretically or historically people felt that it was the technical skills or the cognitive capabilities, but realizing in work done from the business school at Case Western Reserve, probably 20 years ago now, that the idea of managing oneself and managing with people, which is euphemistically called emotional intelligence in a lot of the literature, really is the sine qua non of the highest levels of effective executive leadership. And I think, again, as Marlene or Sarah noted, a lot of the work on feminine management styles, masculine management styles, whatever the term of art is, would indicate that, that's a strength of women, but it often gets disappeared in organizations because it's seen as sort of nurturing, maternal, et cetera. So even though it leads to high performing teams and high performing organizations, it may be disappeared when it comes times to promotion and recognition. So it's a really interesting tension, I think, in the literature around that leadership question.
Okay, good point.
I think that's what I was trying to say about the valuing of leadership styles. We tend not to value that, although we know that it works.
Okay, we have another question here from Terry. How do you get around the privacy laws in Europe and elsewhere? And would it not work against women to have separate lists on men and women?
Right, I think this is a hidden quota question.
Yeah.
Yetunde.
Yeah, Yetunde. You're on mute.
Sorry, Yetunde, it's your phone. You need your phone.
Hi, sorry about that. Sarah, you got it. The question is a bit ambiguous, I think, but maybe that's just me. The person wants to know whether having separate lists will affect women. I don't think so, because it's not about the names, it's just about the numbers and the statistics. So perhaps I haven't, perhaps the person would like to explain a bit better what she means, or if there's somebody else that thinks they can understand what the question is. Yes? Thank you.
Well, I think Yetunde is right that there are ambiguities in the question, but and maybe she can clarify in the chat. But there is also the issue of this idea of some people call it positive discrimination. There's also positive action or affirmative action to tackle issues around diversity. All of these things are just first steps into making any changes, because it's not just about getting the people in and diversity in, but also about having that environment of inclusion, isn't it? So, but there is a thought that maybe we need to have quotas, but that's worked very well. In some areas, it works where communication is good, is very good to explain the why of a quota. It doesn't work if it's just forced on everybody. But there have been quota systems in places, and that works. I think on the question of privacy and data collection, every country is collecting data all the time. We're just going through, we're having our census day tomorrow here in the UK. Yes, we can handle data privacy.
Yeah. Another question, this came from Deb. How might we explore and expose how gathering sex disaggregated data about leadership in STEM might be construed as illegal? Anyone want to address that one? I think it's sort of
I'd say in the United States recently, I mean, part of it now there was a period of time, I think, where the lack of and the idea of sort of homogenizing data collection was there. Now, at least in the healthcare delivery system, it is legally required to report by gender and also by race, ethnicity, using federal characteristics, because the opposite was happening. People were not able to look at people that were being discriminated against or left out because the data was all generalized. I think it's a mixed, it's a mixed bag. I was going back to the other question. I think the idea of separate lists is interesting one, because I'm sure many of you, and I know it happens to me, when there's a search process or some other activity, people come to you and say, do you know anyone? Do you know a woman? Do you know an African-American? Do you know a Hispanic person that might qualify? And it's an interesting question about whether lists could be used in a positive way. And I think the other issue which showed up a lot in the ISC study, was the degree to which names, especially in Africa, South Asia, and the Western Pacific, are not clear. The gender isn't always clear in the name. So it would be really hard to, but part of their challenge was really understanding women's representation, because the gender wasn't as obvious in the name arguably to Western researchers, but in general. So I think it's a really interesting question. It could cut either way.
Yeah. So I know we've gotten follow-up information and recommendations from these people. Let me look here. Yes, Shreya has provided information in the chat with some links from some different organizations on data about our platform, about safety, where our technology stack collects and analyzes crowdsourced anonymous reports about violent crimes, patterns, and insights, and so forth, and enables citizens, researchers, and policymakers to create safer spaces. So thank you for sharing that contact information and those links. That's very helpful. Deb came back. Might we describe this as follows? Numerical equity is a start, but we also need to consider cultural equity and inclusivity better. And I think we all realize that. You know, there's lots of different ways to use the data, collect the data, but we really need to analyze it. And then when we're looking at using it for new programs or initiatives, we need to consider that. So very good point. So, and then Magda also followed up, just sharing an idea. Gender and diversity awareness should start from first grade on including teachers' education, as well as how girls and boys are being portrayed in school books. In 2021, I still certain roles are dominated by boys interested in technologies, or girls are associated with caring. I'm convinced that this is a certain mindset towards gender stereotypes and gender bias that is sort of implemented at a very early age. And I think we've all addressed that. I know with a number of organizations for women in STEM, they're looking at developing more books, comic books, teaching books, fun reading books, where they show girls in various types of careers, as well as boys in different types of careers, to try to get rid of the stereotypes from the old textbooks and the old children's books. And there's a real move, a lot of people trying to generate new literature of different types, showing that equity in careers and so forth.
I think there's also some policy that's beginning to be very successful policy making. So I know Scotland has done a lot of work based on fundamental research around how what happens to children from the very early, from nursery school, and they've carried out integrated interventions where they're not just dealing with what girls, the aspirations of girls, but also what parents think, what teachers think, what employers think. So all the way through from nursery school, tackling a society, wider society, as well as employers, all the way up to employers. And that's around just STEM and gender in STEM. And that's beginning to have a big impact on changing education. Okay. And that's been adopted in other countries as well.
Very good. So Marlene, any parting comments, Marlene?
Well, I'd just like to say it was wonderful to have everyone here and have this great discussion. But clearly, we've got a lot to do. It's one thing talking about the issues, but we've really got to get on and do it. And I think our three organizations, it's great that we came together today, should come together to formulate some action plans to really progress the issues of greater participation by women in STEM, in all STEM fields, and also to progress women into leadership. And thanks to everyone for being here today.
Okay. Joe.
I would just repeat what Marlene said. I was going to exactly say that issue. It's really important to continue this collaboration. And I was really appreciative of Sarah adding the extra M for medicine onto the STEM, because I think bringing the health professions into this conversation could be a very powerful partnership. So I'm hoping we can continue the connection.
Okay, good. Yetunde?
Thank you very much, everybody, for attending this event. It was wonderful. I have special thanks to everybody, but Sarah is the champion. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, and Sarah?
Thank you.
I think everybody's a champion here, so I wouldn't worry. I mean, we need role models like you three, you four. I'm sorry, Gail, I've nearly missed you out just then. But also, I know you so well, that's why. And also many thanks to people who've commented and taken part in the discussion. And we will be following up. We will be sharing all the emails and making sure that slides get to people, but we'll also put them up on the NGO CSW page for our events so that you can look there again. Thank you.
Yes, yes. So, and I want to thank you all for all the excellent questions and comments and the links that you provided. And as Sarah said, we will be following up with everyone if you requested copies and so forth, if you gave us your email. So thank you very much. But also look at our page on the virtual forum. As Sarah said, we'll be posting a lot of the information there, and that will be available through March 26th. So you can come back over the next week and go back and look at this information we'll have posted on that site. So thank you again for everyone for participating. This has been a very good session. I have a page and a half of notes for follow-up. And I agree. I think the three organizations, we need to work together and collaborate. We've got these reports, we've got these studies, we've got this data, and now we need to really kick into gear in terms of action and moving forward and and holding people responsible. And I think we need to work on getting more women in leadership positions, such as Marlene, because in her position, she was able to make some changes. And that's what we need to do at organizations around the world in STEM, is get more women in leadership so they can advocate these changes in committees and representation in companies and organizations, and we'll see a change. So thank you all very much for participating, and enjoy the rest of the virtual forum. I know I'm looking forward to a couple more sessions coming up in the next few days. So thank you all.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.